class. So today we are going to be discussing exploitation among student athletes. So what is exploitation? Exploitation is a broad field that involves most D1 schools in America. While there are D1, D2, and D3 programs at any school, basically, D1 programs we're going to be focusing on today because they involve revenue sports such as football and basketball. So today in the presentation we are going to be breaking down our subtopics, and we are going to be giving you a working definition of what exploitation is, explain our different subtopics and the issues that we have found in our research, and going to be concluding our presentation today with resolutions as to how we can hope for change in the future. So our working definition involves exploitation being a national phenomenon and how it involves student athletes all across the nation, and it touches on different moral, fiscal, racial, educational, and social overtones. Our subtopics that we will be discussing today include pay for play, unionization, socioeconomic issues, academic fraud, and insurance and educational issues. So to begin, I'll be discussing pay for play. The difference between pay for play involving student athletes, or what we term as student athletes today, compared to professional athletes in the NBA or the NFL or NHL, whatever, is that the NCAA has kind of developed the term student athlete. It involves college students being recognized as amateur athletes in relation to professional athletes. So President Theodore Roosevelt had discussed and first brought in a group of people on his cabinet to create the NCAA, or what we know as the NCAA today. And he wanted it to help prevent injury, set rules that everyone has to abide by, and discuss how athletes cannot be paid for playing sports. Through this cabinet meeting, they later have agreed to term the student athlete phrase. We now incorporate this student athlete phrase in basically everyday language. You hear it all the time on ESPN and continue to hear about it every day. Another issue with pay to play is class credits. We are having all of these student athletes come to classes outside of their athletic career, and they dedicate all this time to being student athletes and have to find the time to be academic students. Academics always come first, but why are they not getting any sort of credit in athletic terms when a music student is basically seen as very similar, where they are still brought into schools and involved? They're brought into schools and they are looked at and basically recruited for being a music student, just as student athletes come in and their coaches and they sign and they're brought into the schools the same way. The time invested, it's basically the time invested in football and basketball, as well as any other sports, but mainly the revenue sports, is mind-blowing. So in a bowl game, an estimated 262 days are what is going to take a student athlete to dedicate their time to. A home football game takes about 53 hours throughout the week, and football players typically give 43.3 hours a week. NCAA has $871.6 million in just the year 2012, and the University of Alabama has $143.4 million just from their school coming in. The Michigan State basketball coach has $400,000 a year coming in due to shoe and apparel contracts. So their coaches and different people that are involved in the NCAA and these athletic programs are being paid hundreds and thousands of dollars for doing certain work just as they're expected to do, but the actual athletes themselves that are putting in this time, hundreds of days and dozens of hours a week, they aren't being paid for the work that they're putting in for. In comparison to the coaches, it just seems kind of out of hand. And now Chris will be talking about unionization.
All right, so before I get into the whole big picture of unionization, I just want to throw out a couple interesting facts I found that you could say could be a starter for why the idea of unionization has been discussed recently. Started in 2010, the NCAA actually reached a 14-year agreement with the big network CBS that was worth nearly $11 billion. And so this gave them the right to put on big college basketball games and football games. And usually they get a lot of large, high ratings and revenue and stuff. The problem is the players did not receive any of that money. And the same can be said for what happened in 2011, in 2013, when University of Texas and Northwestern made millions of dollars off their big sports programs, and the players did not receive any money. The people, such as coaches, athletic directors, as you see, Vanderbilt and Northwestern, those guys received nearly $3 million, $2 million from of revenue towards their salary from these two big programs. Which leads me to my next point about unionization. So, in fall 2013, the Northwestern University football team decided they elected to unionize and fight for the right to be considered employees at the university. Part of the reasons for this was because they felt like they deserved better than what they were receiving. The working conditions weren't that great. They felt like they deserved some type of income from all the revenue and from their play that they bring to the school, and they just want some healthcare benefits so they can be covered for all the injuries and potential aftermath from these injuries that could happen. So the Northwestern University football team, led by the quarterback, filed a petition to the National Labor Relations Board. In April 2014, it was actually decided upon by a local director of the NLRB in Chicago that under federal law, these football players were actually allowed to become employees of the university and be paid, along with getting all the other benefits. So even though they were pleased with the decision, they decided they wanted to take it to the next step, take it to the National Relations Board in Washington, D.C. So in August, they put the motion in, and they waited nearly 16 months for a decision. This impacted not only the athletes, but the coaches, directors, administrators, and the NCAA themselves, because this could have been an epic change, an epic decision. However, in August 2015, the National Labor Relations Board decided to reject the motion of Northwestern University football players to unionize, simply on the part that they felt that they did not have jurisdiction over the region that Northwestern was in, and they thought it would kind of throw off things and how the NCAA was run. And it did shock some people, because a lot of people thought that the decision was going to be epic and be a good landmark starting point. So the president of the College Players Association, Rajumi Huma, was disappointed, as I said, but he saw this as a good starting point, as an opportunity for to unionize college sports in general. He did, in some of my research, I looked at there are actually certain laws in certain states, such as California, that give athletes opportunities to unionize. So like public schools such as UCLA and schools like that. Other options that the athletes can use, they can go to the courts, federal courts, use an antitrust motion, they can actually refer back to a case they won called the O'Bannon case, which actually permitted schools actually to cover the full cost of attendance of football and basketball games and set aside deferred payments to the athletes. Although this was a good starting point, there's a lot of work ahead, but there's got to be some optimism here for the athletes that they'll be able to unionize and be considered employees. Next up, we got socioeconomic issues, led by Lydia.
Hi everyone, today I will be talking to you about the issues relevant to socioeconomic status within these educational institutions. So to give you a general overview, since I am applying my sociological background, as Mary said before, I'd like to sort of rewind and talk about the general misconception as a whole that sports are really this place for kids to enter a level playing field and be part of something where their background is irrelevant, where no matter what sport they play, their household median income, their race, their educational background are irrelevant. This is something that people generally believe, and they believe that being recruited to a higher educational institution is an opportunity for them to further their career in education that they wouldn't necessarily have been able to do beforehand. And these people are exploited in the sense that they aren't meant to they aren't meant to have they aren't meant to have Okay, should I start over?
Just reset. It's fine. What? Just reset your thought.
Yeah.
Okay. So basically, these educational institutions are exploiting their players because they come from generally speaking, they come from a demographic that's at risk, perhaps urban youth, perhaps lower household median income, or maybe a more rural area. They're not necessarily there because of their academic success. They're there because of the athletic prowess that they have and that they've been able to practice with their whole entire life because of the opportunities they've had growing up playing basketball, playing football, because that's what was accessible to them. They didn't grow up playing hockey. They didn't grow up playing lacrosse because those facilities were not accessible to them. So they're playing a sport, a revenue sports generally speaking are basketball, football, and maybe baseball in the SEC. And so these people and these sports don't require necessarily a special facility or much equipment. And so growing up, they've been able to afford it, and they've developed a skill, and they're now recruited to these institutions where they should not be because they're not at that social or mental capacity to be there. And the problem is these athletes are working countless hours on the field. They're being forced into academic fraud essentially because they're not at the academic level of the rest of their peers. They receive no workers' compensation, and the administration and the NCAA is profiting immensely from this. The NCAA sort of coins themselves as being a nonprofit. However, their executives are making millions of dollars per year, along with their affiliate educational institutions. And I recently saw a graph that showed the highest public paid employees in all 50 states. And in 39 of those states, the highest public paid employee was either a public university football or basketball coach. So at this point, not only are these student athletes being exploited, but you could also argue that this is something that taxpayers are funding. And that, how do we resolve that? How do we take away this systemic problem of exploitation in intercollegiate athletes? So now I will turn it over to Carrie, who will now be talking more about academic